Today we're going to talk about the differences between wet and dry sanding. Obviously in our project packs they do come with a good range of sandpapers from about 120 grit up to a 2000 grit. The lower numbers being a harsher sandpaper. That includes wet and dry. Personally I would use wet sanding with the 600, 800, 1000 and 2000, and I would probably leave your 120 and your 240 grit to the dry sanding. Wet sanding has its advantages because you don't necessarily need respiratory equipment or anything like that, because obviously it's keeping the amount of dust down and it keeps it on the actual workpiece instead of it floating around in the air. Typically we say to use the dry sanding for when you're doing body fillers or your original prep on your metalwork, so where you want your very, very gritty sandpaper. You want a good bite in and you want to be able to actually see good scratch marks and everything being keyed up properly. When it comes to using your wet sandpaper, I tend to quarter it up and I tend to rip it because it does tend to eat scissors very easily. So just a quick fold and a subtle tear. I tend to tear it into quarters just to make it much easier to actually get into the nice water that we've got for wetting it up. I tend to just use a disposable container because it doesn't need anything more special than that. And we'll put a little drop washing up liquid in it just to help with the lubrication, to make sure that the sandpaper, it isn't binding up and scratching too hard. So you'll want to just give that a quick stir with your finger. Drop your sandpaper in there, give it a good wet. And you want to make sure to just give it a little wiggle, make sure that it's not absolutely sodden, but you want a good amount of water on there, nice and shiny. So I will usually fold it back on itself twice and use circular motions. I tend to use circles because it does just come out with a better finish. So if you have a look, you can actually see that it's gone in and it's matted it up slightly. I'll just give it a quick wipe off so you can see. And it just takes that sheen off it because you just want the shine to go away so that it is a surface which can be painted again. So right now we're using a P800 just to re-rough up in between coats. It's not too aggressive, because obviously if you're using a 240, then when you paint on again, it will show the deep scratch marks, which is what you're trying to avoid. Obviously, giving it a quick go over with this before you paint again just takes out any dust imperfections. As you can see, it's pulled out small pieces of dust, just a little bit where you can see underneath, but it should smooth it out nicely for your next coat. So now we've been through our entire process, re-sanding after a coat of paint and it's been left. You can see that it's not wet. We're left with very, very little mess actually kicking around in the work area, and it's just a good surface to then paint onto, but it keeps everything down. There's no mess, there's not even any water behind the panel because you're not pouring water onto your surface, you're just quite simply moistening your sandpaper. You can see if I lift this up that any dust really has been taken off the edges and settled on the table. It's not actually in the air, which obviously when you're doing in between coats, it makes you very happy to know that there isn't a lot of dust floating about for when you're actually painting the next time. Everything that we're using today is available on our website. Prep Clean 2800, and that is for cleaning painted surfaces. I'm going to be using a piece of blue roll. I mean, you can use any sort of lint-free, like cloth, microfiber, anything like that. But just make sure that you get a good edge to edge. I tend to just sweep it off one way at the end just to make sure there's nothing sat on it. So that should get rid of any contaminants, like if you've touched it, you get any finger grease on it, or if anything's come onto it in between you sanding it and you giving it your next coat. Make sure that you've got the best surface. I'm going to be using a Product tack cloth just to make sure that the surface is dust free. That should give us the absolute best surface to paint back onto in between coats. We're going to talk a little bit about dry sanding. its differences to wet sanding is you usually use a harsher grade of sandpaper because it is for, you know, re-prepping or prepping surfaces in the beginning. We're going to show how much dust that actually kicks up versus wet, because wet is a very clean way of doing sanding in between coats. I'm using here a half dry sandpaper, and as you can see in this little makeshift paper catcher, there is a lot of dust coming off that straight away. And if there's dust going down here, it's on the surface, you've got it absolutely everywhere. It's not as easy to come off when it's dry versus wet. And if it's there, it's going to be in the air, and if it's in the air, it'll settle back on your finish as you're painting.